Welcome to SurgiSmart, cut to the core. Today, we're diving deep into a condition that's incredibly common, but, also widely misunderstood.
You know that feeling, right? That burning, nagging sensation deep in your stomach? We've all been there. But what's really happening inside? Is it just a simple stomach ache, or is your body trying to send you a serious distress signal? Well, today, we're going to decode that exact signal. We're talking about gastritis.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics, what gastritis actually is. Then we'll cover its different types, how doctors figure it out, the many things that can cause it, and we'll wrap up with a look at how common it is around the world. Okay, let's jump right into section 1. We're calling this the stomach's red alert because, believe me, it's about so much more than just a little tummy ache. To get this right, we have to start with the fundamentals. So let's be crystal clear about this from the get-go. Gastritis is not just a casual term for an upset stomach. No, it's a proper medical diagnosis. It means there is actual inflammation of that protective lining inside your stomach, the gastric mucosa. And the only way for a doctor to be 100% sure is to take a tiny sample, a biopsy, and see that inflammation for themselves under a microscope. Now, this brings up a really important distinction that often trips people up. You might also hear the term gastropathy. So what's the difference? Well, think of it this way. Gastritis is like a fire. There's inflammation and immune response. Gastropathy is more like a scrape or an injury to the lining, but without that big inflammatory fire. It's damage and repair. That being said, in the real world, it's not always so clear-cut. Sometimes you can have both going on at once. All right, so we've defined our terms, but gastritis isn't a one-size-fits-all condition. It actually shows up in a few different ways. Let's get to know the 3 main phases of gastritis. First, we have acute gastritis. The word acute is key here. It means it hits you fast, and thankfully, it's usually temporary. What causes it? Oh, a whole bunch of things. It could be major physical stress, a nasty infection, certain medications, or even chemical irritants. It's like a sudden, sharp assault on the stomach lining. Then there's the opposite, chronic gastritis. This is the one that sticks around for the long haul. And the main villain here, the #1 cause by a long shot, is a pesky bacteria called Helicobacter pylori. When it decides to move into your stomach, the constant irritation can slowly wear down the lining, making it thin and weak. That process is called atrophy. The other major cause is when your own immune system gets confused and starts attacking your stomach. We call that autoimmune gastritis. And our third type is reactive gastritis. You can think of this as your stomach basically having a tantrum. It's reacting to something it really doesn't like. Irritants like certain drugs, alcohol, or even bile splashing back up from your intestine. This causes a low-grade, simmering irritation that creates problems over time. Okay, so we've got all these different types and causes. It sounds a bit complicated, right? So how do doctors make sense of it all and get a clear, consistent diagnosis? Well, they have a playbook, a kind of blueprint to follow. And that blueprint is called the Sydney system. It's really a standardized way for doctors, especially pathologists, to talk to each other. It's like a universal language that makes sure when they look at that biopsy, they're all describing the same thing: the type, how severe it is, and exactly where in the stomach the problem lies. So what does this system actually look for? It grades 5 key variables. First is the inflammation chronic, meaning long-term. Second, is it active? Is there a flare-up happening right now? Third, is something called intestinal metaplasia, which just means the stomach cells are starting to change and look like cells from the intestine. Not a good sign. Fourth, they measure atrophy. How much has that lining thinned out? And fifth, they look for the prime suspect. Is H. pylori at the scene of the crime? Now, we've talked a lot about H. pylori and autoimmune issues, and they are definitely the big players, but they're not the whole story. Not even close. The full list of what can trigger gastritis is, well, it's pretty long.
I mean, just look at this range. You've got your infectious causes with H. pylori at the very top. You've got autoimmune causes. But then there are external factors like alcohol, radiation, and chemicals. It can even be linked to other diseases like Crohn's. And then you get into some really specific types, like allergic gastritis. It's a huge spectrum.
And speaking of H. pylori, here's an insight that changes everything. We tend to think of it as something you pick up as an adult, but the evidence is now overwhelming. For most people, this infection starts in childhood. That's right. The seeds for stomach problems later in life are often planted when we're just kids. That has huge implications for public health. All right, for our final section, let's pull the camera back and look at the big picture. We've talked about the what and how, but now let's talk about the how many. Just how widespread is this condition? The numbers might just shock you. Just take a moment and look at that number. 25%. That means an estimated 1 out of every 4 people on this planet is walking around with chronic atrophic gastritis, the type that thins out the stomach lining. That isn't just a statistic. That is a massive, massive global health burden.
And if you want to see where that burden is felt the most, look at this chart. The rates of H. pylori infection in many developing regions are just staggering. We're talking nearly 80% in South America, almost 70% in Africa, and this is no coincidence. It's directly linked to socioeconomic factors like sanitation and access to clean water.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. In Western countries, the picture is changing. As hygiene and sanitation improve, gastritis from H. pylori is on the decline. Great news, right? Well, yes. But at the same time, we're seeing a rise in autoimmune gastritis. It's like we're trading one problem for another, and scientists are still working hard to understand exactly why.
So let's quickly break down who's most at risk. If you have an H. pylori infection, your risk for that chronic, thinning type of gastritis is almost 2.5 times higher. If you have an autoimmune condition like thyroid disease, you're much more likely to develop autoimmune gastritis. And in countries like the US, immigrant and minority groups often have a higher risk, mainly because of a higher prevalence of H. pylori in their communities of origin.
And all of this brings us to one big final thought. The world is changing fast. Our diets, our hygiene, our lifestyles are all in flux. We're seeing infectious gastritis go down in some places while autoimmune gastritis is on the rise. So the question we have to ask is, what will the face of gastritis look like for the next generation? What kind of distress signals will their stomachs be sending? That's a critical question for the future of global health.